All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This is the first episode of the Barron Perspective podcast. Our first guest is Mr. Terrell. This is kind of an experiment that we're going to be running. It doesn't currently have a schedule, but it probably will in the future. This is just a test run. Enjoy and leave comments. Tell me what you think. All right, what college or colleges did you attend?
I first went to the University of Houston for a semester to try to get a few credits in before I went to the Marine Corps. It did not go so well. I wasn't as disciplined or as focused as I wanted to be, or probably should have been. And then I went off to the United States Marines. I did a tour in the U.S. Marines, and then came home on the reserves, and was a much better student. I was a little older, a little bit more worldly experience, a little more grown up, I guess you could say. And I transferred to Texas State, to the Hill Country, and I finished my first undergrad degree at Texas State University with a Bachelor of Fine Arts in theater.
Now, when you decided to move on from Houston,
Yes.
What made you move on from there?
Couple of reasons. University of Houston is a fantastic university. I still stay in touch with them. Several of my friends, went to that university. I'm from Houston, so it was right there. They have a great theater and arts program, and fairly involved athletically. But I needed a change of pace, needed a change of scenery. At the time, Southwest Texas State was a smaller college in the Hill Country. So it was away from the big city of Houston and in a little small town called San Marcos, which is between Austin and San Antonio. And it's beautiful. It's rolling hills, and a river literally runs through campus, and tree. There's a lot of frisbee, a lot of scenery, that kind of thing, and smaller class sizes and stuff like that. So it was a better environment for me.
Okay. So maybe for the people who want to start out in the Army, go into that in the future instead of going to college, can you talk about your experience in the transition?
I can. My family did not have a lot of money for college, and I was an average student. I did very, very well in honors and AP classes that I enjoyed, and I did very, very poorly in classes that I just was unmotivated to perform well in. So there wasn't a lot of scholarship money or anything like that. And I was one of the first people in my extended family that wanted to go to college and go to university. So I got on the GI Bill. So my motivation was to serve my country and kind of see the world a little bit, but also to get some experience and to get some money. I got on the GI Bill to go to college. So I was a much, much better student. I think that serving in our armed forces, as kind of scary as that may sound or seem, you could definitely do a lot worse. You could make worse choices than joining our armed forces.
Okay. How was your initial transition from high school to college? Was it really difficult?
High school to college, it was definitely an adjustment, and I try to, give a little bit of a heads up and advice to my current students I've had in the past. Sometimes having that much freedom means that you're not using your own self-discipline. You need a lot of self-discipline to succeed in college, because you don't have your parents or your guardians like you do in high school telling you, hey, you got to meet that deadline. Hey, is your homework done? Or whatever. Okay, here's what you have for dinner. Now if you're at college, all those deadlines and stuff have to be maintained by you. So, I reveled in that freedom and was probably worse off for it. I'd spent my money in places where I probably shouldn't have been spending them, or didn't budget very well. And, it was just me telling myself to do the deadlines. So a lot of times those deadlines weren't met.
What qualities would you say from serving in the Army helped you in your later on going to college at Texas State?
Make sure you say Marines when you put this down, because
Okay,
Marines don't like being called an army. But
I'm sorry, I don't.
No, it's okay. Armed forces are fine.
Armed forces.
But if you go quoting me saying I said the army, I'm going to hear about it
No,
from about 500 people.
No, I listen to this thing over and
I'm kidding.
Make sure
So, you don't say military or armed forces, but the Marines, yes, serving in the Marines. Well, it made me grow up, and it did give me a lot of self-confidence, a lot of thinking for myself, and I was just a little older. I wasn't a 17, 18-year-old freshman anymore. Now I was a 21-year-old sophomore, and that made a huge difference.
Did you know what you wanted to study?
Initially, when I went to the University of Houston, knowing that I was going to go in the Marines, I wanted to be an archaeologist. University of Houston and the University of Texas both have fantastic forensic anthropology and archaeology, anthropology schools. So I wanted to be Indiana Jones, go dig up ancient artifacts and, drive jeeps through the desert and such. But I'd always had sort of an amateur actor performance thing in my background. I was in things like show choir and, did summer stock theater and stuff like that as a kid. The acting thing was always there as sort of a hobby. When I got called up for the second or third time from the Marines from Texas State, I said to myself, after surviving, and many of us did, a huge called up for a war, for the Persian Gulf War, I said to myself, all right, I'm changing my major and I'm going to do what I want to do now. So I switched majors to theater arts, after the Persian Gulf War.
So you would say archaeology was kind of like a thing you wanted to do at the time, but wasn't really a long-term goal.
That's exactly true. It ended up being more of like a hobby rather than. But at the time, I really thought that I might make a career out of it, knowing that I would need to go on and get a doctorate and work for a museum or something like that.
If you feel comfortable, would you mind talking about your tours?
No, not at all. Yeah, no. I did an initial tour in the mid '80s, and it was a time of relative peace. I joined fairly soon, relatively, and not because of that, but I joined very, very shortly after the bombing and the civil war in Lebanon. So the Marine Corps barracks in Beirut was exposed to a terrorist attack, and we lost almost 300 Marines who were almost like a Pearl Harbor kind of thing. They were sleepy and not all that well prepared based on UN rules and guidelines at the time. And then our rescue mission in Grenada was right after that. 1983, 1982, 1983. I joined in 84 and then shipped off to boot camp in 85. The world was a pretty peaceful place then. We trained very, very hard this is still the Cold War for, to fight either defend our country against either Soviets or China.
Commies.
Yeah. And then, the world kind of changed a little bit. So my initial tour was seeing the world a little bit. I made it I was in Okinawa, and I was in Hawaii, and I was in Norway, and I was in bases in the Carolinas and in California and in Utah. And then when I got to the reserves, I was a reservist in Texas. I actually saw more conflicts getting pulled up from the reserves than I ever did on active duty. The kind of the three biggies is we got called up for Nicaragua and Honduras. We were having some the Sandinistas, who a lot of people politically in the United States believe them as freedom fighters, but we got called up because they were also warlords, and they were kind of terrorizing a lot of the villages and stuff like that. So we got called up to kind of scare them. I never went into battle there. We floated off the coast in a great big aircraft carrier and tried to scare them into peace, which to a certain degree worked. I got called up for the first free election in Haiti.
Wait,
so we got called
before
up.
You
move
on. That's the whole Nicaraguan Contra
Nicaragua
affair, right?
Contra affair, yeah.
No, because I watched a movie recently about that.
Yeah.
Tom Cruise.
Yeah.
American Made.
Yeah. I haven't seen it yet, but I want to. Yeah, that's right. I would have been floating off a ship, right in the middle of all that. And it was very controversial as far as American politics go. But, when you're a 19, 20-year-old, American Marine corporal,
you're not really worried about that.
Yeah, you just do what you're supposed to do. And, what we weren't really aware of the big picture. We were just trying to get through the next day. I got called up for Haiti. It was the first free election in Haiti in maybe ever, but certainly since like the 20s or 30s. They'd had a series of warlords and stuff that were controlling there were no elections. And so they needed some United Nations help to guard the election polls so that people could come in and vote freely without fear of retaliation. And I was very proud of that service. They elected a man named Aristide, who was voted in as their prime minister and ruled there for a while. And then I got called up for 5 or 6 months for the Persian Gulf War in 1991.
So the Persian Gulf War, can you walk through that?
Well, as a reservist, we got called up a little later. The Army paratroopers, the 101st Airborne Division, the 82nd Airborne Division, and 1 division of Marines, not to mention our Air Force and such, had been called up in that year to try to free the Iraqis out of Kuwait. The Iraqis invaded Kuwait and claimed Kuwait as sort of their ancestral territorial land, but also, let's be honest, it also had, most of the oil fields in the region. Saudi Arabia was a very big...
I think that's the event with all the... what was that organization called with all the oil companies that were together?
OPEC.
OPEC,
yeah. Which was run predominantly by the Saudis. But we have to remember, too, as Americans, we forget that there are different sects of Islam, and the Sunnis don't like the Shia very much.
There's
and
a huge conflict over
Saudi Arabia and Kuwait are a different brand of Islam than the Ba'ath Party of the Iraqis. So as a reservist, I didn't get called up until early December with orders to ship out in January.
So at what point in the war do you get called up?
I got called up in the build-up, but I wasn't over there. They sent us through a couple of weeks of kind of brush up. We were reservists. Most of us were in college or, working for UPS or FedEx or, a lot of my brothers and colleagues in the Marine Reserves were literally either college students or blue-collar workers. They literally worked in the oil fields around Houston or, worked as truck drivers or cops or sheriffs and things like that. And we didn't arrive over there until after the, quote, air war started. President Bush had set a deadline of January 15th for them to pull out, and they didn't. So midnight, January 15th, we started, an air assault and striking the berms and stuff like that. So I got over there by a few days after the air war started. And our orders at the time were to go in on helicopter assault and to free the airport. We were supposed to land in the middle of the airport and fight our way out on a perimeter to secure the airport. They did not put us down on the ground because, as you guys all know from history, the air assault went so well, and the waves of Marines and Army and tanks and stuff coming across the berm against, at the time, it was the 4th largest army in the world. They were too close to the airport. They thought if they put us down in the airport and we fought our way out to the edge, that we would be too close to our, invading 1st Marine Division, and there might be too much friendly fire. So I never actually, thank goodness in some ways, I guess, I never actually, set foot down in a hot LZ. This might be a little hard to understand, but some of you, if anyone's read the novel or seen the movie Jarhead, that there was a definitely sense of frustration. There was a sense of, I was older. I was an older Marine at the time. I was a grand old man at, 23, something like that, and a sergeant with a bunch of these, young troops that were, 17, 18 years old. But for all that training to have that kind of a letdown of, you're amped up, your adrenaline's flowing, and here you're doing this for your country or whatever. It's not like I wanted to go racing out and kill people or anything, but I would be lying if I didn't say that there was a sense of disappointment to not being able to do our part or whatever, if you will. But, the disappointing thing after that was that we all had to kind of fight that sense of hurry up and wait and depression and stuff, because all of the line companies that had been there since, August all went home. The war ended famously in like 28 days. All those folks that have been there, hanging out in the desert in Saudi Arabia or Kuwait for months and months, they all went home. And the reservists that just got there and sort of missed the war, if you will, we were still on duty for months after that, guarding POWs and, a lot of
So even after the war ended, you were still serving in there?
Oh, yeah. We stayed for a while because they wanted to give the line troops that fought the war liberty. They gave them leave. They all took 2 weeks off or whatever. And so we kind of protected the world, if you will, while everyone else was off, having a little bit of vacation. And then when all the line companies came back up and got back up to full strength, then we were, released to go back home and go back into the reserves. But by that time, I'd lost an entire semester, of courses of class. Which, whatever, that's what a reservist does.
All right. So you come back from the tour. Mm-hmm. How are you feeling? How's everything going?
Yeah, well, at that time, America was on a big high. It was very, very rah, patriotic at the time. We just won a war with our allies. You can hear older veterans say, man, how different was the reception of our armed forces coming home and being celebrated and having parades. I mean, I didn't buy a beer for a long, long time. I was on a college campus in uniform frequently. Sometimes not, though, because I was in various shows and plays and stuff. But they're extremely different from our experiences in Vietnam as an armed forces.
Okay. So, as we know, you're a big theater arts guy. Mm-hmm. So how does that all come about after the armed forces in your service?
Well, I decided to change my degree plan, which really affected my bottom line there for a while. All of the courses that I didn't get to finish were all, courses that I needed for a first degree plan, but not for the theater arts degree plan. So I never went back to take them. So all of those 5 incompletes, ended up becoming Fs, right? Yeah. So even though I wrote letters and lobbied, I was able to get credit or get because it was way past the drop date or whatever. So 2 of them I was able to work out, but I have 3 Fs on my college transcript, which at the time, dropped me from a 3.2 or something to like a 1.8 or 1.9 or something. I was on double secret probation there for a while. And then slowly but surely, because I did pretty well in college after that, mostly A's and B's, my graduating GPA was like a 2.8 or something like that, when it really should have been, maybe a 3.8. My GPA never really recovered all the way.
Okay.
Yeah.
So going through college, what did you find that you liked about it? What did you find you didn't like about it?
I loved being in college. I really did. I liked the community of it. I mean, obviously the social life is a lot of fun. You're going to parties and you're going to football games and a lot of social aspects to it. When you get a little older, some colleges, including all the ones that I went to, freshmen have to live, on campus in a dorm, and some colleges underclassmen have to. But by the time you get into your junior and senior year, a lot of people are living in apartments, off campus with a handful of roommates. And that sort of community I really, really, really enjoyed. not just the social life, but also working on projects together and having study sessions together and offering assistance to each other with papers and doing research together. There's a lot of solitary time in college, of course, but that social aspect of it I really enjoyed and I really excelled at. And, I think if you asked many people my age, they would probably say they'd do it all over again, in a heartbeat.
All right, so college is a good experience.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what classes did you prefer and like while you were there?
That really never changed from high school. The only thing that really changed for me totally was I just performed a lot better at the courses that I did not enjoy, because in high school, if I didn't enjoy the class, I didn't do well. So I found my motivation, sort of adulting a little more, if you will. So I always struggled in mathematics. I liked science. I was very, very good at, the science labs, the hands-on practical stuff. But when it came to time to start doing the trigonometry and the algebra and stuff in physics and things like that, I really struggled. But, I did well. I always did well in history classes and English classes, English lit classes. And then, of course, obviously the theater courses. By the time we got to performance courses and stuff, I thoroughly enjoyed those, trying to hone my craft, learning how to be an actor.
Okay, let's talk about your first opportunity that you got.
Mm-hmm.
As an acting job or a play job. Could be school.
A couple of things. While I was at Texas State hosts a summer children's theater program, and you got paid. So it was a professional gig. So literally the 3 summers I was at Texas State, I stayed at Texas State and worked as an actor or a director or a stage manager or a scene designer, sometimes all of the above, on these children's summer shows. Very, very much like, something that we might see at the Forum Theater, here at in Metuchen, or not the kiddie aspect of it, but like our summer shows here at the Woodbridge Community Players kind of thing. But so I got a professional, because so my resume was already being filled with professional credits before I even graduated. And it's sort of much like doing an internship or something if you're doing a more traditional college track. And then my first actual professional career job in the theater, I got recruited from Texas State to go work at Fiesta Texas. Fiesta Texas at the time was San Antonio's first big theme park. The very first Six Flags was in Houston. It was called Astro World, because it was right there at the Astrodome and part of the Astros. That was and they had Six Flags in front of the Astro World, and they were the Six Flags over Texas. So the second Six Flags was in Dallas, and they called it Six Flags over Texas. Then there was one in Georgia, Six Flags over Georgia, and then one out in California, and the rest is history. Now there's a Six Flags
now it's everywhere.
Near almost every city, including Fiesta Texas is now a Six Flags Fiesta Texas out in San Antonio. But at the time, when Fiesta Texas got built in the mid-90s, it was an Opryland. There's Opryland in Nashville, one of the largest theme parks in the country. Opryland decided they wanted to build another big theme park somewhere. They built another theme park in San Antonio, Texas, called Fiesta Texas. And their big thing, we think of Opryland as being this twangy country music, and there are some aspects of that. But Fiesta Texas wasn't twangy country. They tried to focus on all genres of music. So each area of the park was a different culture with a different music. There was sort of a German town with oompa music, and a Hispanic Mexican area with salsa and Tejano music. There was a 50s area with the foundations of rock and roll, and there was a country and western area. I got a job as a stage manager and a director of a stage show in the country music area. That was my first professional gig. I mean, the legit, a salary, benefits, the whole 9 yards.
So you were directing the play itself. You weren't actually performing it.
Directing that one and stage managing. I found that I liked doing the performance stuff, but in many ways I was actually better at the managing and directing. And a lot of those skills really, really helped me out today as a teacher of theater, because really I'm kind of a director of the theater classes and what the students do in the classes.
So explain the theater from your aspect of as a director, as opposed to like an actor or someone.
Well, it's funny in a lot of ways. It's more difficult. Yes, you have to have the talent to be an actor, and I was never the most talented person in the room. I mean, I thought I did pretty well. I have students ask me all the time, even now, "Yo, Mr. T, why aren't you famous? Why didn't you do it?" You know, and I had my run. Yeah. You know, I was involved in 5 different Broadway shows. I've been in a couple of big mainstream Hollywood movies, but most of my career was, you know, being the 5th cowboy from the left, you know, an extra in an episode of Law and Order, or, you know, being a character actor in an off-Broadway play or in a Shakespearean play. But being a director is a lot, or even a stage manager, working with a director, is a lot more responsibility. It's a lot more nerve-wracking. In a lot of ways, I equate it to being in the Marines. There's not a whole lot different in being a stage manager of like a Broadway show and being a sergeant in the Marines. The gig is the same. You're in charge of 30 people or so. You got to get them fed. You got to get them organized. You got to make sure they know what they're doing. And then you're the one in charge of them when you go out and perform.
Okay. So, going through your more your theater stuff, let's go like a little deeper into your career. Say the not Hollywood, the Broadway stuff.
Yep.
The stuff you consider important or really valuable to you. Really
when I finished, I knew even at Fiesta, Texas, that I was eventually going to end up in New York. A lot of my colleagues from my class or the other classes around me at Texas State scattered to the winds. A lot of them went to Hollywood. Some of them, all of them did something out there, but some of them succeeded and are still out there. Some of them worked for a few years and then said, I want to go back home now and do something else. A pretty good pocket of my classmates went to Chicago and did theater and things like that in Chicago. Quite a few of them went to Florida and worked in things like dinner theaters and regional theater down in Florida. And a whole bunch of us went to New York. So I actually had more friends from Texas State living in the New York City area than I did, knowing the locals. I mean, we continued to have parties and stuff together and see each other socially, which was really great way to kind of break into New York City. And then after a while, you start auditioning and doing things for a while. You start meeting people from Massachusetts and Iowa and, Michigan and Oklahoma and places. And it doesn't really matter where everybody's from then. You're all New Yorkers, struggling, starving actors. I'm really very proud of all that early stuff. In the same way that a lot of times an older married couple might look back and think fondly of their, sort of honeymoon years or whatever, when they had a dinky little roach-infested apartment and could barely afford pizza and stuff like that. But older married couples look back on those days fondly. And that's very, very much like how I look back on my sort of off Broadway days before I kind of broke in professionally. If you're working off Broadway, there's that stereotype. You've got to do something else. You have to wait tables. Yeah, I didn't want to wait tables because I didn't want to come home at 2 a.m. and not have a weekend.
Yeah, it's tough
forever. So I did temping. So I'd work 9 to 5 as like a temp, and then go work on my audition or whatever. I'd audition on my lunch breaks. But after a while, I don't know what this says about me. Hopefully that I'm eager and that I was wanted. I didn't need to audition after very long because I had a reputation for being, a real go-getter. And I was very, very soon after arriving in New York, I was turning things down. And the next show I went on, I might be doing something else. I always said, and I ask my students to do this today, don't just limit yourself on the acting. On your resume, put that you can stage manage, that you can direct something, that you have a valid driver's license, that you speak Chinese or whatever, right? Because what'll happen is you'll say, I'm auditioning for this role, blah, 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 blah. Thank you, next. It says here that you can manage a box office. And I went, yes, I certainly can. Great, we might call you. So I might get that call 2 weeks later to say, do you want to come manage the box office for our next show? And if I don't have anything going on, I said yes. So if they liked me and they liked what I did and they also had my acting resume, I might get a call from that same theater company 2 years later. Hey, we need a chubby bald guy to play this sheriff or a dad or something. Are you available? And I go, great. And those kind of things. I mean, I went back to back to back to back to back to back for 12 years.
So you would say building up your connections is really important.
Networking.
So say for some people who want to get into acting in the future when they get out of high school, maybe give them the reality of it.
Oh, it is very, very tough. It's not all that different from trying to be a professional athlete or like a published novelist. It's a dog-eat-dog world out there. The agents and the talent people see, dozens and dozens and dozens of headshots or submitted work daily. And if you do have to, I got very fortunate. A lot of people in the movies get discovered, on Hollywood and Vine because they're waiting tables or whatever. They have a certain look. Usually in professional theater, they want you to have some background. You may have a nice look, but they want you to have some background. They want you to have some education. There are very few people on Broadway these days that don't at least have their masters, from Carnegie Mellon or NYU or, USC or somewhere. Rutgers, Mason Gross. So I would say just don't get discouraged. Some people, after a while, they haven't broken in and made it famous, and now their trust fund is gone. So now they have to move back home to Oklahoma. Well, that's the reality of it. But I have lots of friends, lots of colleagues and former classmates that are very, very happy working somewhere near the theater industry, but not being an actor per se, because they had one big shot or whatever, but they never quite broke in. They might work in marketing. They might, work as an ad person. They might work in theater development. They might be a teacher or something and do a small regional theater in the summer kind of thing. Quite a few of them, like me, are actually theater teachers.
So that kind of ties into to college and do what you want to do and do what you want to do, what you love. So can you kind of tie that into how you came from transitioning from theater arts to teaching?
Well, yeah, that was multifold too. A lot of people say, why did you change so much? And in a lot of ways, I don't look at it as a change. I do almost as much acting on a daily basis today as I ever did, in New York, because I'm up on my feet doing fun stuff with the students. I mean, the running joke that I say all the time is, well, I act like a teacher. In some ways, maybe I don't really know what I'm doing all that well, but at least I'm acting like it. But I've got a second master's now in education, and have, a lot of teaching is on-the-job training. But I never really looked at it as a change. I do all kinds of acting with my theater classes and theater students. I do just as much stage managing and directing, maybe not on the same scale as a Broadway show, but definitely hours of the day and numbers of steps or whatever on my Fitbit up on the stage acting. I do much of it, and my hope is that I can share with my students any of the hard lessons and things that that I've learned along the way.
All right, so I'm gonna cut you a little short because I gotta get back to class.